challenges that people worry about in the National Health Service when we at NHS Elect work with organisations, with teams and with people who are tasked with training, facilitating or working with groups. The one thing that crops up time and time again is their worry about one person particularly dominating the conversation, talking over their colleagues all the time, or being quite assertive or even aggressive in the way they're operating in the meeting. So what are the tricks and tips we've got for helping that quite difficult situation? Well, number one, people often repeat things if they don't think they're being heard. So it could simply be that the person who's assertively and repeatedly saying the same thing wants some assurance that their point is being heard. So one tactic is to write up their point, perhaps on a flip chart, record it on a PowerPoint screen, whatever mechanisms you've got for recording it. Make sure the group write it on there, feedback slips or whatever it is, and show them, point to it and say, look, we've listened to your helpful contribution. Everybody has heard it. It's there in writing. Let's now move on from that and explore some of the detail or other important topics. So that sort of psychology is sort of an important thing to think about. Why is this person behaving in that way? And as I say, if they don't think they're being heard, that's one of the things that they will do. If they're carrying on, often, as I've said before, groups will self-police, so you can ask the rest of the group, once they take breath, once they pause, they'll have to take a breath at some point, so you can intervene and say, well, that's really interesting to hear you say that again. I'm wondering what the rest of the group think, what their thoughts are on that. If they don't take that subtle hint, and if the group don't respond to that, a tactic I've used a number of times is to ask that sort of domineering, overly assertive person to choose somebody else to speak. So give them the power, give them some authority, and say, look, we've heard you speak. I think people have listened to what you said. I think what would be really interesting for the group would be to hear some responses to that. So could you pick 3 people in the room perhaps who you'd like to hear their views? That will make them feel quite empowered, and obviously it changes the person who's talking. So it moves attention away from the dominating person. I'll say this in a nice way, but you could use a human sacrifice. You could pair them up with other people in the group and allow some poor soul to be utterly talked at for 5 minutes. But of course then, if they're broken into small groups, you can then ask for feedback and ask for the thoughts of other groups, not the one with the dominating person in it. So you're diluting that dominating effect. There is one other tip. You have to be a bit careful about it, but lots of studies have shown if you can move around the room as a trainer, a facilitator or whatever, if you can stand appropriately close to the person who's talking all the time, and particularly if you're standing up and they're sitting down, that dynamic can close down their desire and willingness to completely dominate the conversation. So standing relatively close to the person who's doing all the talking, as I say, as the trainer, facilitator, as the coach, whatever role you're taking, can really help deal with those dominating people. So asking the rest of the group, get them to choose someone else to speak, split them into small groups and sacrifice some poor soul to work with them, stand relatively close to them, and before you do any of that, as I say, they often do this because they're not feeling heard, so show them they're being heard, write it down, point to where you've recorded it. Sometimes that will do the trick. So plenty of tips there to deal with that particular issue.